My name is Paul Connett. I'm a retired professor of chemistry. I specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology when I was teaching. And for the last 21 years, I've been researching the toxicity of fluoride and the dangers of water fluoridation.
What are your concerns about fluoride, Professor Connett?
Well, I think my major concern now is the way that governments are lying to us, that we can't trust anymore health departments in the fluoridating countries. They're working backwards from the fact that they've stated many years ago that adding fluoride to the water was safe as far as health was concerned, and it was very effective at reducing tooth decay. But they don't have the science to support that. Well, not good science to support that. And it concerns me that we have civil servants demonstrating absolutely outright propaganda and public relations techniques and abandoning science. I mean, I understand when politicians lie. I mean, they spin everything. But I don't accept that civil servants should be doing the same thing. And I certainly think it's very serious when professional bodies only tell the public and their members one side of the story, and when dentists and doctors only get one side of the story at dental and medical school. This is serious. It has very serious ramifications when you take a serious topic like fluoride's toxicity off the radar screen of the people that are going to look after us. But in terms of my specific concerns, fluoride is extremely active biologically, extremely active. And it's quite understandable why the level in mother's milk, mother's breast milk, is very low. In other words, nature is protecting the baby from fluoride exposure. She had a reason for that. When we fluoridate, a baby in a fluoridated community, whether it's in England, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the United States, whether it's Australia or New Zealand, or the other handful of countries which fluoridate, that baby is getting approximately 200 times more fluoride than nature intended. And that to me is a reckless thing to do. And now science, not particularly in the fluoridated countries, because they haven't done much good science on health since the United States essentially endorsed fluoridation in 1950. Instead of giving us science, they've been promoting this practice. But the science is catching up. The first thing we know for certain is that if a child ingests fluoride before their permanent teeth have erupted, they're going to have an increased risk of dental fluorosis, which is a mottling discoloration of the teeth of various gradations, from very mild to moderate to severe. Now, when they started this practice in 1945 with the trials, they anticipated that about 10% of the kids would get this condition, but only in the very mild form. Now, in 2010, the Center of Disease Control in the United States that promotes fluoridation admits that 41% of American children aged 12 to 15, have this condition, and not all in the very mild. 8.6% mild, which is 50% of the enamel impacted, and 3.6% of kids with moderate or severe, where 100% of the enamel is impacted. But that is what we can see. That is what they cannot deny. But the question for everybody else should be, well, what about the things you can't see? When fluoride is damaging the growing tooth cells in a baby's body, what's it doing to his other cells? What's it doing to bone cells? What is it doing to the endocrine system? What is it doing to the brain? Well, and what is it doing to the bone? Because we know that 50% of the fluoride that we ingest each day accumulates in the bone. 50% is excreted through the kidney, the rest accumulates in the bone and the hard tissues and other calcifying tissues, including the pineal gland. And it was a British researcher, a British dentist, who showed that fluoride accumulates in the human pineal gland and lowers melatonin production in animals. So we have that concern. Another concern we have is with the thyroid gland. We know that doctors in the 30s, 40s and 50s in Argentina, France and Germany used to dose patients with overactive thyroid gland with fluoride to lower the activity of the thyroid gland. And then last year in England, Stephen Peckham from the University of Kent did a study in which he found an association between the fluoride levels in the drinking water and the prevalence of underactive thyroid gland in 98.8% of the general practices in England, albeit an ecological study. However, it raises a very serious red flag, and it's amazing that we had to wait nearly 60 years before we got that study. It should have been one of the first studies done in the fluoridating world. It's been one of the last. Meanwhile, we have over 300 animal and human studies which shows that fluoride is neurotoxic. And not only is there remarkable consistency with the human studies, but there's a consistency between the animal studies and the human studies. Let me explain. They've done nearly 40 animal studies where they put animals in mazes, which is standard technique, to see how well they learn, how well they remember. And they found that the rats or mice exposed to fluoride were less able to negotiate a maze to find the food. And that is, in my view, completely consistent with the fact that we now have 51 out of 58 human studies which shows an association with exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ. Now, the proponents of fluoridation like to say that that is only happening at high concentrations. Phooey. One of the best studies was done by Zhang in 2003, and in 2004 I was actually able to go to the villages where he did this study. In this study, he found a dose-response relationship. He divided the high fluoride village into 5 subgroups, and as the concentration went from 0.75 parts per million up to 4 parts per million, the IQ, the average IQ in each of the subgroups went down, a dose-response relationship. So we know from that in that study, IQ was lowered between 0.75 and 1.5. What's the relevance? The relevance is we fluoridate worldwide between 0.6 and 1.2. So here we have an overlap in harm being found at the very levels at which we are fluoridating our children. And this is without even adding safety factors, which you need to do when you find the lowest level that causes harm. You apply a safety factor to protect the most vulnerable kid. Before you even do that, there's no margin of safety. And in fact, we've just published, Bill Hersey, myself, and Zhang, and others published a standard technique for determining the level of risk when you've got a dose-response relationship. And this analysis shows that 1.4 milligrams per day in that study lowered the IQ of those children by 5 IQ points. 1.4 milligrams per day. That would be 1.4 liters of water at 1 part per million. That's the average level at which we fluoridate. So we're actually finding at precisely the levels that many children are being exposed to, again before safety factors, that IQ is being lowered. So what's the significance of lowering of 5 IQ points? If you're dealing with a whole population, if you're dealing with one individual, you might not notice this shift of 5 IQ points. But if you're exposing the whole population to a toxic substance, which is the real fundamental weakness of fluoridation, is you're exposing everybody, regardless of age, regardless of diet, regardless of health, to a toxic substance. A shift of 5 IQ points would halve the number of geniuses in your society and double the number of mentally handicapped. If you have any notion that any substance out there, whether it's in gasoline, paint, or in the water, you do everything that you can to remove it. And this is something that we're doing to ourselves. We do not have to add fluoride to the drinking water. There is no difference in tooth decay between the fluoridated countries, in 12-year-olds, between the fluoridated countries and the non-fluoridated countries. There are better ways. Tooth decay is not caused by lack of fluoride. Tooth decay is caused by lack of education, lack of dental hygiene, the kids not knowing how to brush their teeth properly, kids not even brushing their teeth, and too much sugar. It's too much sugar, not too little fluoride. So it's a totally unnecessary thing. that we are doing. We're doing it to ourselves with possible calamitous consequences. And I'm afraid that those fluoridated countries, as I started in the beginning, are in a state of denial. As far as they're concerned, I'm Looney Tunes. We're unscientific. We're using junk science. Well, the interesting thing is I got together with two other professors, Professor James Beck, MD, PhD physicist from Calgary, and Spreading Micklem, a biologist trained in Oxford, who taught at Edinburgh University. Three retired professors, biology, physics, and chemistry. We wrote this book, The Case Against Fluoride, published in 2010, 7 years ago. Now, if I was in their shoes and I believed in fluoridation, I would have got a team together, and they've got millions to pay to get this team together, and absolutely crucified us, taken that book and demolished it. I mean, we made our whole case transparent. We didn't overstate, we understated, and we had 80 pages of references to the scientific literature backing up everything that we said. And they have produced nothing, nada, nilch, zero response to this. How responsible is that? I mean, I hoped that with this book we would raise the level of debate, but the other side does not want to know. The other side denies. They won't debate me in public, or very rarely will they debate me or other leading scientists opposed to fluoridation in public debate. Even from the safety of their offices, they can't even produce a response in writing to our book. Instead, they continue to use the simplistic ploy, I've got a white coat on, I'm a dentist, I'm a doctor, I'm telling you that fluoridation is safe and effective. I'm the British government, I'm the health department, I'm telling you that fluoridation is safe and effective. You don't have to read anything, just take my word for it. It's called authority, it's called endorsements. But sadly, from their point of view, they're losing that authority. More and more people are coming to distrust the very agencies that are set up to protect our health and the environment. And I don't celebrate that. I think that's very, very sad, because we're going to need to trust somebody in the future. The future has got some pretty nasty things around the corner. We're going to need to trust people and who say, this is the science, this is safe, this is dangerous. Right now, we can't trust them. We can't trust them on mercury in dentistry. We can't trust them in the additives to vaccines, and we can't trust them on fluoride. Instead, they call us conspiracy theorists and insult us. And I'm tired, after 21 years, someone who didn't want this issue when my wife persuaded to get into it, treated like a nincompoop because I have, with an open mind, read the literature and I've opened my mouth. And I'm happy to found out to be wrong, but I am not willing to back off when somebody can't produce the science that says the science that I'm reading is wrong. They can't produce their evidence. Until they do, I'm afraid we've got to keep working, and we've got to get the media interested. We've got to get some decent journalists to do some investigative journalism, because until they do, then who does the public believe?
Do you think there is a connection between fluoride, say, in the water and cancer?
There is some evidence of cancer. There's some evidence, certainly Dean Burke from the National Cancer Institute and John Yamayanis thought so in the 70s and actually triggered the NTP study on cancer in animals, and there was some evidence that fluoride caused osteosarcoma in rats. And also since then there have been a couple of studies which indicate an association between osteosarcoma in young boys and fluoride exposure. In fact, one study has never been refuted by Bassin, published in 2006. She showed that when young boys were exposed to fluoride in their 6th, 7th and 8th years, they had a 5 to 7-fold increased risk of succumbing to osteosarcoma, rare bone cancer but frequently fatal, by the age of 20. 5 to 7-fold increased risk of succumbing to osteosarcoma by the age of 20. That study, published in 2006, has never been refuted, because the difference between her study and all the other studies is she actually studied this window of vulnerability, this particular age range. Everybody else looks at the total life up until 20. Nobody else has done that. So her study is unrefuted. And we're talking about some, not many, some young boys may be being killed by this practice. You would think that it would deserve far more attention than it's got so far.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Connett.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you for all the work you're doing
Well, it's been a
and the
pleasure.
persecution you're facing.